What's the most refreshing act of I don't give a frick that you've ever witnessed? Senior year in high school, we had to take a second standardized test, sort of a beta for a future version they were rolling out. Before the testing week, they gathered my class together and told us that no administrators could check our tests, and that we would not be getting individual grades. Instead, how well we did would determine how the test was handled next year. Our class as a whole decided to mark C for every question. They were so proud we finished the test 2 days ahead of schedule. We got Thursday and Friday off that week. The next year, we screwed up their figures so bad, they had to do another beta test. TLDR, don't tell seniors a test will not affect them at all. Was on a ferry one day, standing next to a guy on the ledge. Guy was texting, dropped his iPhone into the sea. He just looked over for a second and pulled out some gum from his pocket and chewed on it and continued looking at the islands passing by. I looked at him once and he just shrugged briefly. Dude skipped straight to the acceptance stage. Engineer was getting a lot of pressure put on him. Lots of OT the last couple of months. Had a meeting and was getting bombarded with questions and a lot of hostile comments from management. He stopped for a few seconds and said I am outta here and walked out of the meeting. The project came to a screeching halt which lasted 2 months until people came up to speed. The secret dream of all engineers. One day at my old job, my old boss called everybody together because the upper management decided to cut some people out. This old lady overheard it from the bathroom, and then she zoomed out of there, grabbed her stuff and left before she could get properly fired. She then called the HR to tell them she was getting her paid vacation that was on hold, and hung up the phone before the HR could respond. And she turned off all possible contacts, like cell phone and emails. Then she took 30 days of paid vacation and 4 days of paid sick leave and 29 days of absence. In my country, the law says you can be absent for 29 straight days without being fired for just cause. When she came back, she was properly fired without just cause and got all benefits like unemployed insurance etc. TLDR. Old lady took a 30-day vacation, 4 sick leave and 29 days of absence before she could get properly fired. This is straight beautiful. At a high school party where everyone was drinking underage and there was around 90 people, I'll never forget watching the cops pull into the driveway and seeing every single person take off sprinting into the cornfields. Rural area with a mile of corn 500 feet from the house. And with everyone sprinting away from the cops, one guy sat in a lawn chair and continued to drink his beer while everyone else was running around. I was watching it from the bed of my truck hiding. Go to finish that beer. I was driving behind a person wearing a hat driving their convertible with the top down on a nice summer day. For some reason they leaned their head out the car and their hat flew right off in the wind. Without missing a beat they reach over to their passenger seat and put another hat on their head. Kept driving like nothing happened. I was driving down the street one day and saw one grown man give another grown man a piggyback ride down the sidewalk. They were both laughing. I regularly give my boyfriend piggyback rides. Not very long ones though. He's 6 feet tall and I'm a weak but 5 feet 2 girl. It always cracks us up. At a New England boarding school, there was a kid who can best be described as a modern Mark Twain character, X. He grew up living on a boat, didn't wear shoes to places if he thought he could get away with it, etc. He was expelled just a few days before he graduated, I think for drug use but possibly one too many alcohol infractions. With nothing to lose, he took off all his clothes and walked stark naked from the dean's office back to his dorm. I would love to read a book about him. We have a co-worker that has a garden so big he brings flowers to the office to make space. One time he brought gorgeous gigantic flowers that are very hard to tend and I asked him how he grew them. Well, my flowers are like me, they just grow when they're happy. The bloke is 80, he's retiring next week. I'm an IT, and I was a network administrator for much of my career. I was the new guy on a team of 2, me and the senior network engineer. I had only been on the job a short time, and our employer was planning a massive upgrade of our campus-wide network. Early in the planning, our employer thought our engineer didn't have the experience to handle a project of this size, so they wanted to bring in an outside consultant. Our engineer said this was a waste of time and money. Anyway, at a kickoff meeting, they were laying out the timeline, budget, etc. And we found out that they had contracted the consultant. The engineer asked why, and they told him they thought he couldn't handle a project of this size. He calmly said, okay, your consultant can do the whole freaking project by himself, and walked out of the meeting. They then looked at me and asked if I could lead the project. I told them that if they thought he couldn't handle it, there was no way in heck I could. Yeah, being a consultant is super easy. Get hired on, figure out what the lead was going to do in the first place, change a few words around, then do what was going to be done originally. It's kinda stupid because the leads aren't going to freak up what they have to support, whereas consultants mostly don't care. Management just feels better when the opinion costs more or something. Several years ago when I was in college, I was at one of the approved smoking sections of the campus. I went to having a cigarette. A guy I recognized from one of my classes who was also there smoking got an important phone call, so he moved to the edge of the approved area to talk in privacy. One of the campus security guards, who was notorious for having a superiority complex, happened to be walking by at this time and told him to get back in the approved smoking area, which he was hardly 6 inches away from. The guy refused and politely tried to explain that the call was very important, personal, and he didn't want anyone else to hear. The security guard continued hassling him to get back in the approved area. This went back and forth for about half a minute or so. The guy finally got frustrated and said, "Dude, blow me." The security guard, very surprised, snarkily responded, "Excuse me, what was that you said, baloney?" And the guy yelled, "No, I said blow me, you freaking butthole," really loud. The security guard's eyes got big and he stood there for a few seconds, then quickly walked away without saying anything. It turned out dude's mom was hit by a car the day before and was getting an update from the hospital about her condition. Lost it at baloney, lol. A few years ago, a friend of mine was going through emotional breakdown. He spent one of his nights driving around drinking Jack out of the bottle. Apparently he passed a police car taking radar. The cop didn't pull him over, so he decides he needs to go into the police station to file a complaint that their officers aren't pulling drunk people over and that he's the proof. I can't decide if he's a good Samaritan or an idiot. Probably both, lol. I heard a story from a friend of mine who is an engineer. He was on the site when a new younger supervisor came on site. Young guy trying to prove himself, and the young supervisor sees the crane operator reading a book in his crane. It's his break time. They were high up in the building and could see him reading the book. Supervisor asked why he is allowed to do that, and trying to make a point decided to send the guy home and make a point of him costing the company money to work, not read books, even though he explained he was taking his lunch break and that's what he enjoys. Just reading his book and sipping his coffee. It also doesn't make sense to climb however many feet down for his lunch break. Anyways, the supervisor sends the guy home and the high up boss comes on site an hour later and sees the crane operator isn't there. He asks and the other people explain what happened. Turns out that crane operator is one of 3 people in the country at that time that can operate that crane. Apparently the supervisor got fired. Crane guy got a raise and is allowed to read his dang book whenever he wants. Not bashing crane operators at all here, but they can go hours at a time without doing anything. I always enjoy keeping in radio contact to make sure they are enjoying whatever they are reading. People like that supervisor don't understand labor very well. Once while working at Macy's, I saw a dude using moon shoes as actual shoes. Totally not practical in any way. He was taking big awkward steps but was totally rocking it. Few years back, a friend of mine was working retail with me, just moving skids to the floor and stuff like that. At the time we had a huge butthole of a GM constantly demanding more work and a harder hustle, just being a dong in general. Well, my pal was leaving for a new job and was already past his time just helping out with extra work we had when he could have just gone home. Coffee in one hand, pallet jack in another, dragging skids around when our GM stops him and asks him, "Where are you taking that skid? Don't warehouse it, put it on a top shelf out in one of the aisles." Essentially what he was asking was for my friend to take maybe 60 plus boxes of small product off a skid and up on a shelf out of reach on the retail floor. And to top it off, he also wanted him to unbox them all first. Literally the most tedious, redundant task you could be doing. My friend just dropped the skid where he was and said, "You do it," and left the building. No, you. My dad's a pretty reasonable guy, right up until the point where he meets someone who isn't so reasonable. Then he has absolutely no problem sinking to their level just to frick with them. So we're pulling out of a parking lot. I want to say we were at Bass Pro, but there is a Chipotle in the same parking lot and it was lunch rush. So we're pulling out of the parking lot and a woman was trying to get to Chipotle and was in way more of a hurry than she needed to be. My dad had the right of way, but she tried to sneak in before he came around a corner. I assume she thought he would brake and let her through. He did not. So what we're left with is two cars, her big SUV and his big Ram, which together take up all of the space in this turn, so neither one can get past the other. So she starts honking at him and he's just giggling. And I mean giggling like a little girl. He thinks this is hilarious that she was being so rude and is now so pee off. So he starts by waving at her and smiling. It just makes her honk more. Eventually she just lays on her horn. So naturally he does the same. From an outside perspective, there are two cars that are now just in a constant song of honk at each other. I asked him what his plan was and he told me that he was just wasting time until she realized that she could just back up. There was nothing behind her, and she could have gone back at any point in time, but I assume she was so mad that she wanted him to back up instead. Now like I said, my dad had the right of way, and he will stick to his principles until he dies if he has to, or until he has to pee really bad. We were literally there for close to 10 minutes before she finally backed up, at which point my dad decided he wanted to go the other direction and got out of her way. She started honking at him again. Your dad is a dickhead and I love it. He's the right kind of dickhead. Motorcycle rider is out having a ride on a beautiful morning. Vapiding bat swerves into him, actually contacting his handlebar before noticing that there is a bike there. Rider didn't have time to slow down enough to avoid being hit. He manages to stay on his wheels, and the car speeds away. I get to a stoplight, and I'm just in time to see our hero ride up to the light, put down his kickstand, walk over and twist the mirror off the car. He drops it on the ground, mounts up, blows the light, no traffic at this time of day on a Sunday and is gone. Vapid Dingbat sounds like a vehicle that would be released in the next GTA Online update. I was waiting at a bus stop on my way to school and I saw a guy in a suit skateboarding down the street in downtown Cleveland at 7 AM. There is a middle-aged Asian man that rollerblades in a full suit every morning that passes in front of my house. The other day I saw an old man with his wheelie cart trying to cross the street at a busy intersection. He had the walk signal but was walking so slowly that the light changed when he was in the middle of the crosswalk. The drivers started honking at him, but instead of hurrying across to the other side, the old man stopped, turned to face the line of cars and did a little old man dance, blocking traffic until the light changed back. Then he carried on walking like nothing happened. A little old man dance. What a legend. I heard from one of the managers. The boss was planning to fire me after I came back from lunch, so I just didn't come back after lunch. I got in trouble at work once. They told me I'd have to talk to the manager, so I went to his office. He wasn't there. I just shrugged and went about my day and never heard anything about it. I worked in a craft cocktail bar for a while, and a guest was complaining that the drink she got didn't match her preferences. She was being rather rude and condescending, and wouldn't give anyone a direct answer as to what was wrong with the drink. A guest to her right asked, "What did you ask for?" She replied, and the guest, without hesitation, grabbed her drink. He finished it in one chug, looked her straight in the eye, and said, "That's exactly what you described, and it was delicious. Don't be a bee." We bought him all of his drinks the rest of the night. A legend that will stay in the minds of the serving industry. My daughter freaking loves feeding the army of ducks that live in the golf course behind our house. I try to get her to not to because bread isn't good for them. One time after I got out of the shower I saw her out on the back porch feeding the ducks our blueberry bread. I told her to stop and she looked at me and tipped the rest of the bag out to the mouths of what looked like 100 ducks. She is now the duck god. If your main concern is the diet of the ducks and not the massive amount of waste they leave or the noise, all of which are very valid, try investing in a more nutritious feed. Your daughter gets to keep her subjects happy. You get to clear your conscience. Plus duck feed is probably cheaper than blueberry bread. My grandmother is 88. Her dad died when she was very young, and as it was during the Depression and a single woman couldn't support 4 kids, she and her sibling were put into a children's home for most of their childhood. Her sister is a couple of years older and is her only family. Her brothers were on the boys' side and they rarely saw them, took on a mothering role with her that never really stopped when they got older. My grandma loves her sister, but avoided her as they got older because it was annoying to be bossed around when she was a mother, then grandmother. My grandpa passed away a month ago, and at the funeral my grandma was chatting to some friends. My aunt decided it was time to go upstairs and told my grandma so. For the first time ever, grandma turned to her and said, "You have been ordering me around for my entire life." Well, not today, and turned back to her conversation. It took her 83 years, but she finally stopped caring and told her big sister off. I guess losing the love of your life after 70 years takes all of your fricks away. Good for her. I'm sorry for the loss of your grandfather. I hope grandma is doing well. I worked at a call center for a while, which, as we all know, is heck on earth. Had a co-worker look my dead in the eyes and say, "Thanks for calling Verizon. Go frick yourself," and hung up. He then proceeded to log out for a 2-hour lunch. He came back, but was quickly escorted out. I love to tell this one because I got to watch it all unfold and because I caused it, to an extent. I worked for a call center for a time, and a friend from my original training class was getting tired of it after a couple years. This is a guy for whom life has basically gone. Job, large savings. No job, little savings. Rinse repeat. He lives totally minimalistically the whole time. So he came to this job after 2 years of neat life. And to neat life he was prepared to return a hearty 3 years worth of savings under his belt. He told me he was tired of the bulls, and he didn't want to keep working. I liked having a friend at work with his attitude, so I convinced him to instead make them fire him. He agreed, and began a very linear scale of laziness. The first week, he began a strict regiment of call avoidance. He would come in, abuse the phone status changes, take maybe 1 call, go on his first break, come back, take maybe 1 more call, go on lunch, etc. For a full week he took 4 or 6 calls a day, and no one said a dang thing. The second week, he took basically no calls. He did a great job of looking busy when important people came by. Somehow, his supervisor did not come to talk to him, and the people who monitored phone stats either overlooked him or were investigating a phone anomaly. The third week was where he really shined. We were responsible for our own timesheets, as represented on the employee website. He would come in at the start of his first break, go on break, take no calls, go on lunch, take no calls, go on break, and leave. But on his timesheet, he put his normal start and end times to get paid for a full work day. The Friday of week 3 is when they finally came for him. I was so proud of my boy when they laid down a piece of Word doc in front of him to sign, stating he would relinquish his pay that he did not earn, which he promptly refused to sign. Since they could not compel him to sign it, the supervisor got irate and walked him then and there. Thing is, if you're fired, you have to have an exit interview. He didn't get one, so they had to call him back in, pay him for his time, and exit interview him properly. And then of course he got unemployment to supplement his savings. He did so well he moved to Colorado. And if anyone is feeling like this company didn't deserve that level of scamming, I'm happy to report it was Comcast. The last sentence made me so happy. I'm not really sure if it counts, because it was me, but anyway I happened to have the displeasure of working at the local Walmart. I'm a cashier and I had been working for 9 hours and I got off at 10 PM. So most people know that the light being on above a register means it's open, right? So here I am doing my happy, or I guess not so happy, thing. Checking people out. At 9:55 I go ahead and shut my light out and have my current customer put my closed sign at the end of my belt and continue like normal. But this is Walmart. People are freaking idiots. So people continue to just come through. Some people even pointing at the sign and chuckling. And after about 15 minutes, 10:10 at this point my CSM came up just telling me to finish up my line and go home. 10 more minutes go by and I'm finally done. And some mother sucker comes back down my line and unloads their freaking cart. So I did the only logical thing. I took my badge off and left. as this uncultured butt yells at me as I'm walking to the back to clock off. Not a single frick was given. I hate my job. To be honest, how hard is it to read the sign and say oh crap, this one's closed, instead of just laughing and continuing through? What a bunch of buttholes. Worked as a chef at a place in Sweden, and the head chef was a real bastard. The dude was on drugs most of the time. When he wasn't, he was drunk. So one day the owner had enough after another incident with the waiting staff, and just came into the kitchen, yelled at the dude and told him to go home and never come back. So the head chef just started removing his work clothes right there and then, down until he only had socks, shoes and underwear on him. He grabbed a bottle of wine standing by the oven, opened it and walked out the kitchen door out into the actual dining area. He stopped to chug the entire wine bottle in front of the guests, carefully placed it on a table, and walked out. This was midwinter in the northern part of Sweden. He lived about 10 minutes away, and didn't own a car. He never said a word to the owner. I never saw him again either. I don't know about refreshing, but I kinda respected his exit even though he was an absolute douchebag. Thought I'd share it here. I am so happy to not be working as a chef anymore, cause that'd be me in 10-15 years. The head chef wasn't only addicted, he had issues with stress when crap hit the fan, and he was never at fault. It was always someone else's fault. He could make up amazing dishes on the spot, and he could handle stress as a normal chef, just not when it came to relying on others. I could handle the drinks and the drugs, if he'd been able to keep his crap together. Anyone who has worked in any restaurant will know what I mean by that, and I work on the other side of the fence now. I rate customer service and product quality on hotels, restaurants and shops all over Sweden, and I couldn't be happier with my job. A chef with a drug and or alcohol problem. Never heard of that before. At my last job as an insurance adjuster, we had this guy who was always perpetually at management for perceived injustices. Well, one day they bring us into a meeting to describe to us a bunch of workflows, and he just rails on them, even going so far as to get up on the board in the room, drawing a pie chart and forcing the directors to admit that they're making us do more work than reasonable. He was reprimanded afterwards, but it was nice to see that somebody thought the same way I did. Had a chemistry teacher in high school who was told ahead of time that she wasn't going to be offered a contract next year with the school. It was like January or something. She started teaching the way she wanted to, cussing, and just being an awesome teacher. Whenever someone would ask her why she did that, she'd respond, "What are they going to do? Fire me?" Good friend of mine ran out of money on a night out, was pretty drunk and didn't fancy the 3-mile walk home in the cold. Decided to smear some dirt on his face and then walked into the local police station and told them he'd been mugged and beaten up. The police took pity on him cause he's a little fella and gave him a lift home. Bloke has no shame at all. My local police will just offer you a lift. Guy at my work making over 100k is getting crap for something stupid for the last time from this supervisor that nobody likes. Doesn't say anything. Leaves all his crap. Gets up and walks. 2 days later, he's got a raise and doesn't have a supervisor anymore. Whoa, that guy knew his worth to the company. That's a strong play. Dude around here takes his 2 pet rats with him everywhere he goes. To the shops, to the pub, you name it. Just brings them with him. I know a guy who brings his pet miniature goat to the pub. 0 fricks given. All the locals love him. Our tourists look distressed though. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.